You're listening to Grace, Geltman, and Weld on the Hammer Factor. Take it away, boys.
Well, I hope you're not planning on calling the podcast, or Kara's going to have to intervene with Grace.
I'm going to call learning disabled, learning challenged.
All right, welcome to Hammer Factor. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Limbaugh.
Yeah, go ahead. You got it.
Well, welcome to Hammer Factor, episode 60 of the Hammer Factor. My name is John Gray, show producer, and I would like to introduce my co-host, Outdoor Alliance Policy Director, Louis Geltman, co-owner of Immersion Research, John Weld. How's it going, fellas?
60 episodes. Aren't people getting sick of us yet?
I thought this was 59.
Well, it says that on the show. It's hard to explain. Weld, can you explain that?
I can. You did a show without me. You didn't tell me.
Oh, God.
That's the explanation.
We're still talking about that.
To explain, really.
I'm
just telling you the facts. Yeah, can I ask you something? Has anyone seen a pre-on cocaine in the wild? I actually saw one on the river the other day.
Where?
The day we paddled the Tross, there's a guy in a cocaine. It's molded. The word cocaine is molded into the boat. It's not like a decal that they could have changed if they wanted to. That's the only one.
I haven't seen a
I hope
cocaine.
when you fly to South America with that, you get taken into like a back room at the port for 12 hours.
Well, we got an exciting show lined up for you. We have a leading climate scientist on the show from a PhD from MIT. All kinds of accreditation for Mr. Tom Farrar. Also,
he must be super rich, right? That's how it works. The climate scientists it's all big money-making conspiracy, right?
He's just sucking in the George Soros money. He'll delve.
Big climate.
he'll delve into that.
Every time I hear that, it's like not only is it absurd, but even as like a conspiracy theory, it makes no fucking sense. It's like if you're willing to pretend that the science is equivocal in any way, shape, or form, like there's like fossil fuel companies like lining up to write you checks. It's like if you want to make money faking science, it's like, and you're doing it in defense of climate change, you're a fucking idiot. You know?
I don't know. It could be like an illusion of control that the government's got in place. I don't know. We'll find out. We also have JT Hartman on the show, who put on a study titled "The Differences in Core Rotation and Maximum Forward Reach Between Whitewater Kayakers Using Feathered and Unfeathered Paddle Blades." So that ought to be interesting.
I'm just gonna bite my tongue until I hear what this gentleman has to say.
Yeah,
who knows?
So basically, we have.
I can't believe this exists.
Yeah, it's an advanced biomechanics study published December the 11th on the day that we are recording. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. We'll hear what JT has to say. And essentially, I believe that this study gets to the bottom of it. So
Does he also prove like the Dagger Crossfire is the best whitewater boat ever designed? Period.
We can ask him. We can ask him when he gets on the show. But anyway, we got two major league guests lined up. It's going to be really good, and I'm excited to get into it. Louis, what is going on in your world?
Man, I don't have a ton more to report since last week, honestly. I feel like I was feeling pretty optimistic about this public lands package coming together last night. We got some pretty good news about the state of negotiations on this Emory County, Utah public lands bill. It's been a little bit contentious, but is shaping up to be pretty sweet. So I think that's kind of a linchpin on this thing coming together. And then I woke up this morning and Trump and it's like sniping at Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer over this border wall scheme. And, again, like if we shut down the government over this border wall, I think all of this work is going to fall by the wayside because it's just not going to happen if everybody is at each other's throats about this border wall nonsense. So I don't know. I mean, we're gonna carry on. I think outside of that, which is obviously outside of our control, um, things are moving along. So fingers crossed. Um, and then I don't know. Do you want to talk about this Waters of the U.S. rulemaking?
Should we just like build the wall so we can get these things in there? I mean,
Personally, or I mean, I feel like that's outside of my professional responsibilities. But I mean,
mine too.
it's just, $5 billion. It's like they just trot around these numbers for nonsense. It's like just for the purposes of Trump placating his political base. It's like, just give me a break, man. I don't know.
Let's get into Trump. EPA proposes big changes to the federal water protections. What does this have to do with stream flow and navigability and what's considered navigable, and how does that work?
It's complicated. I haven't refreshed my memory on how all of this works in a while, but basically there's been a long running dispute over the scope of the EPA's jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act, like what water bodies are subject to regulation, which means, essentially protection under the Clean Water Act. And there were a couple of Supreme Court cases in like around 2006 that like affected the scope of the rule, like kind of talking about the ability of EPA to regulate wetlands that have sort of a less clear like surface flow connection with streams, how the EPA is able to regulate like ephemeral streams, meaning rivers that don't run all the time. And there was like a Bush administration rulemaking, and I can't remember. I think it might have gotten shot down in court. I have to refresh my memory on all this, but there was an Obama administration rulemaking that was pretty expansive, and it's been a big target of polluters who, just don't want to see the Clean Water Act applying to, as many water bodies as possible. So, but I don't know. This is all super in the weeds. Like, what it really comes down to is what every single kayaker on Earth knows, which is that small streams go into bigger rivers. And if you don't protect the small streams, you're not protecting the water quality in the bigger rivers. And so this rulemaking is basically aimed at like scaling back what water bodies are protected under the Clean Water Act. And I'm looking at the headline from E&E News this morning, which says EPA falsely claims no data on waters in waters of U.S. rule. Apparently, the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers, which also has some jurisdiction here, said that at least 18% of streams and 51% of wetlands nationwide would not be protected under the new definition. But EPA has been saying they don't have that data, but E&E had basically FOIA'd it already, and they do have it. So they're already, lying about what they know about this rulemaking. It's something that's going to affect water quality in all the places that we paddle. What's going to happen is it's a proposed rule that's out now. There's going to be a comment period. We will help make it possible for people to submit comments on this. They're probably going to go ahead and finalize the rulemaking in a way that's bad, and then it's going to get litigated again.
What industry benefits the most from this kind of thing?
I think some of the
mining,
agriculture has always been someone who's like an industry that's made a lot of noise about the scope of this rulemaking. But under the Obama administration's version, there were still like a ton of exemptions for the agriculture industry. And it was hard for me to see the connection between their anger and what was actually in the substance of the rulemaking. I think the home building industry has been a big opponent of this rule because they're concerned about what wetlands are subject to jurisdiction. They want to just be able to fill wetlands with impunity without concern that they're connected to jurisdictional water bodies.
So let me ask, is the Little White considered a navigable waterway?
I believe for the Clean Water Act. So it's confusing because navigability is a term that has like very different meanings in different contexts. And so for as far as your right to float on the Little Way, I believe it's navigable, but that's under state law. Under the Clean Water Act, a navigable body is like the Columbia. But because the Little Way has a really direct connection with the Columbia, that would still be jurisdictional, I believe, even under this interpretation of the Clean Water Act. But then, it excludes groundwater in a lot of ways, which is where all the Little White's water comes from. All of those small surface streams that only run after it dumps rain, those would be ephemeral. So I think those would be excluded under this interpretation of the Clean Water Act. So, you wouldn't be able to pollute directly into the Little White, but you could pollute some small water body that would find its way into the Little White with much more impunity under this version of the Clean Water Act's
Makes sense.
jurisdictional rules.
Savage. It seems so it seems like as far as like LWCF, all of the public lands bills, all of that, it's kind of being held up by the wall at this time. Is that where we're kind of at? It's just everything's on a standstill.
Well, we haven't quite gotten there yet. I mean, I think the key congressional committees are still negotiating what would be in this package. Then leadership has to agree to attach it to the year-end funding bill. But if there's a government shutdown over the border wall, then it means basically they're not going to pass that funding bill. The government's going to shut down for some indeterminate period of time. And then when people come back, our expectation is that nobody's going to want to hold hands about public lands. So I don't know. This is all like a degree of speculation at this point, but that seems to be the predominant interpretation.
When is this session over?
As of now, well, I guess the session, nothing's really like set in stone, but the current funding bill expires the 21st.
21st.
So that's kind of what we're operating under as the assumed deadline for all of this.
Crazy. Well, still, outdooralliance.org. Get on the email list. Lewis, you'll keep us up to date on anything that needs to happen, any last minute.
Yeah, please. And it's going to be, if this does happen, what's going to happen is like the package is going to come together, and then we're going to kind of need everybody to reach out to their members of Congress, lean on them to be pushing leadership to include this in whatever the year-end funding bill is. So there's going to be a minute here when on like relatively short notice, we want to be able to apply like maximal political pressure.
Very cool.
Stay tuned.
Very cool. Outdooralliance.org. Get on the email list. It's definitely, you won't get any spam. Everything you get will be important. I can promise you that.
Thanks, man.
Let's see. Where do we go from here? We sold about half of our Whitewater journals, guys, which is pretty exciting.
Nice.
I have some in the mail to you guys. Hey, you know what? If I have one regret from my paddling career, it's that I didn't take more notes and didn't document more of what I did. So we still have some of those left. We only did 100 of those. We've got some good listener mail here. Seems we kind of struck a nerve, Lewis, with our social media and public lands.
I know. I feel like I got more heated about that than I do about Zinky stuff.
We've got some great things on climate change here. Carl Whip writes in, are you guys ready to get into some listener mail here real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
Carl Whip writes in, and this is at the top of the list, and he does, how does parenthood change you as a paddler and raising children in the paddling community? I'm not sure if we've brought this email up, but we are going to get into this one. But it's way more than we can just touch on as we go through listener mail. So
I think we need to bring on the anonymous paddling parent guy.
Cover this one.
To chime in.
So Carl, no, we're going to get into that.
He has a wide range of expertise, as it turns out.
I had some dialogue with ABRG. He lives a fantastic life. I mean,
he's eclectic dude, no doubt.
I can't really say what's going on because it may blow his cover, but let me just tell you, he's amazing.
Yeah, he's who was the guy for Dos Equis beer? The most interesting in the world. Comes to mind.
ABRG does qualify as that person. This comes at us from Fred Morrison. So this past summer, I switched back to a straight shaft Shogun from the bent. Aside from 2 days of reacclimating, it has been a great change. The one thing I've noticed is that I feel my boof stroke is stronger and more precise. Think there is any science to that, or is this a figment of my imagination? Fred Morrison. P.S. Okay, a little shit talking. Well, how can you say you hate food trucks and then the same episode say you are a partnership with big mans?
All right, let's address the first thing first. I think he's right about that. I'll tell you why I think that way. Because you see, I switched to a bent shaft paddle when I was teaching a bunch, and I used to get really bad tendonitis at the beginning there every year. And if you extend your grip, extend your arm, and like for a full reach and a forward stroke with a bent shaft, your pinky is closer to your body. And when you pull on that paddle, you're putting sort of an equal amount of pressure across your knuckles, right? You're pulling equally. I think when you use a straight, and I think that does relieve some kind of stress in your wrist and probably does prevent tendonitis in some rare occasions. But I think when you paddle a straight shaft paddle, you start pulling with your tip of your hand a little bit sooner than the rest of your grip, and with your pinky. I think that does seem to give you the feel that you're getting more of a bite off the at least the front part of your stroke. But I think that also does aggravate your wrist a little bit. That's my theory on it. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. I think the problem with bent shaft is they lull you into, you don't have a proper catch before you start pulling.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah. In a roundabout way.
I think you have
in the food truck thing. The food truck thing. He I don't know what the hell he's talking about. If you'd listened to the show, I said I didn't want food trucks to take out to the Green, a bunch of other rivers. You take out. You don't need that crap there. There's nothing wrong with food trucks.
You need to come to IR.
He better cut it out. He better cut it out. Or he's gonna get banned from the show.
I wouldn't mind a food truck at the takeout.
That was
throwing that out there.
Fred may be our first banned listener. Is that what I'm hearing?
He's on probation.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
Okay.
Watch it, buddy.
This one comes at us from Bobby Miller. Guys, I really enjoyed the latest episode. I'm pleased to see the idea for the one-wheel shuttle is gaining steam. Uncle Eva's advanced Canada trip this past summer, Steve ran most of her shuttles on one wheel. They go really well on gravel roads of Quebec. The only issue we had was battery life. The North Fork of
the issue that he had was that it didn't work. Keep going. Keep reading. I love this.
Now that they make one that can go for 15 miles, I could see the one-wheel shuttle becoming even more useful. I agree with you 100%, Bobby Miller. Lithium-ion technology. If you doubt lithium...
First of all, this one-wheel discussion is the biggest example of buyer's remorse that I've ever seen in my entire life. These guys buy these things with the illusion that they're going to use them for shuttle. They find one cockamamie place where they can use it for shuttle. It doesn't work. The battery runs out. The guy has to stash it in the woods and finish walking the shuttle. And they're talking about how great it is. First of all, get a bike. We'll run out of batteries, right? It's about 5 times as fast, and you don't look like a complete douchebag on the side of the road riding this stupid thing.
Hey, I'm just telling you, Bob.
You might actually burn a calorie or two while you're at it.
Bobby says the North Fork of the Blackwater, Lower Blackwater, seems like a perfect fit for this idea with the railroad grade going through the canyon.
But how are you going to get it to the take? I mean, you're still going to have to walk the entirety of the way up to Douglas Falls, right?
If you spent $1,500 on this stupid thing, Gelman, you would figure out some way of incorporating it into your ridiculous shuttle scheme.
Hey, I'm a firm believer, and I think that the one wheel will be a staple of shuttles in the future. That's all I'm saying.
Won't we?
That's okay, we got through retarded one wheel talk, Fred Morrison's band.
Hey.
Okay, here we go. The SOR. Okay, so Jonathan Rue comes at us. He's sort of the chief of the Strategic Outburst Reserve. He says, I appreciate Lewis's policy discussion. I'm trying to get a little clarification on what public dick kick means. Thanks for giving me something to listen to. While everyone is out paddling, I'm stuck in my workshop making paddles that don't have a 60-degree feather. John, so what do you mean by a public dick kick?
Like when people are publicly squabbling, like if they're just up out on CNN kicking each other in the dick, metaphorically. I don't know. Is that opaque?
So today when Pelosi and Schumer and Trump were in the office going over everything, was that a public dick kick?
I don't know. It seemed like they were trying to. I don't know. I honestly I couldn't even watch it because I turned it on for 2 seconds and I just couldn't take any more of it immediately. So I'm not sure if they actually got into the dick kicking yet. The dick kicking is going to come later when Pelosi and Schumer are being interviewed and they're like, this guy's an out to lunch crackpot, and Trump starts talking about the Democrats shutting down the government. That's the dick kicking part.
Got it. That clears up a lot. All right, well, we got time for one more here before we got to get JT Hartman on the line to really put this paddle offset thing to rest with some true research. So that'll be good to hear. This comes at us from Bobby Voigt. Hey guys, I do agree that going to beautiful places for the sake of social media exposure is shameful, but I think there are still positives for sharing our world of kayaking online. In our modern age, more people need to be exposed to these places in a way that enforces respect of the land. People won't care about or fight for the environment unless they go out and experience nature firsthand. Online kayaking videos are what inspired me to go explore beyond the city life of the East Coast and find something greater in the wild. Don't go telling all the secrets, but give a hint so that people who are meant to find them can know where to start looking. Bobby. Lewis, what have you say?
Let's read that one from that other. There's somebody else who wrote a good one that you just sent on email previously too. Let's read that and then we can talk about this some more.
Did that one make it on this list? Hang on, I can bring it up here real quick.
Don Gately. I got it.
You want to read it?
Sure. Don Gately writes, not only is posting media from the same 6 runs contributing to the crowds, it's also cliche and boring. And for runs like the L-Dub, Stikine, Upper Cherry, etc., I'm sure the concentration of media is contributing to the crowds. That said, keeping other runs secret is only going to exacerbate the pressure on the few marquee runs that everyone is already talking about. Want to reduce pressure on Upper Cherry? Post up rad photos from the North Fork San Joaquin, a proper adventure that typically flows at the same time. Tired of sharing wolf track camp with the same 90 people you see every other weekend at the L-Dub takeout? Perhaps think of ways to get more people stoked on the Nass, Mathco, Iskit. Every person exploring a new or previously unknown run is one less person angling for a selfie at the Oregon slot. So if you discovered a great run, assuming it doesn't have access issues, please share beta widely. P.S. The Seven Rivers video and blog were hugely influential for me and catalyzed a 10-year High Sierra obsession. Over the past decade, I've been fortunate to get on most of the High Sierra multi-days and some Fantasy Middle Kings multiple times. If one avoids Upper Cherry at medium-low flows, crowds are rarely a problem on the Cali multi-days, especially the ones with a high suffer factor, e.g. Postpile and Kings. That's a good email. I'm like with both of these guys in a way, you know. I think that maybe I've become extra especially crusty about it because to me it's not even so much the all the kayakers showing up at the Little White. It's all the Portlanders hiking in to Spirit Falls and just causing really savage erosion down there. There's a private property owner right at the start of the hike in who obviously has some weird ideas about, I shouldn't say weird ideas, but is obviously concerned about the access situation there. We're seeing like a ton of erosion down there. Starting to see like garbage down there. and it's not so much the kayakers as the fact that the kayaker social media feeds into this broader, I don't know, just deal of like attracting people from Portland to the same handful of hikes in the Columbia River Gorge for the sake of going down there and like taking a selfie and posting it on Instagram and just fueling the same thing over and over again. And so, as annoying as I find the the way kayakers, talk about it or share it or whatever, it's much more that fuels into like a broader ecosystem of social media fueled exploitation, and I guess it would be fine if those things were staying within our own little world, but that's not really how it goes.
So should we go back to boater talk?
Yep. I think we should.
I mean, because at least when you were on boater talk, there weren't a bunch of, Portlandians tapping in on everything that was like making it on their news feed. It was just your paddling group that was seeing these pictures of Little White and whatnot.
Yeah, and I mean it's also interesting too. Like I wonder, like for Upper Cherry, I think part of the reason people experience it as so crowded is just that, like in a good year there might be a week when you could run that thing. It's like sometimes I think about that with like the green too. It's like maybe one of the reasons it feels so crowded sometimes down there is that it's a dam release and everybody gets crowded into the same like 1 or 2 hour window every day.
Oh yeah, especially in the summer. Like you could go out there right now and you won't see anybody. I mean, you could paddle for a week and you won't see anybody. So
like if it were 24 hours of water, it would be a totally different deal.
I think this is going to be like the paddle offset. I think it's going to keep rearing its head as we move forward. All right, you guys ready to figure out exactly what's going on with this paddle offset?
The real question is JT ready for his peer review here?
His public kicking.
This is going to be the most hard out thesis defense he's gonna face, I think.
Well,
Lewis, you seem to have some inclination of where this is going to go.
I really don't. I'm
Hey guys.
Hey.
Hey JT, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Stoked to be here.
We're already pissed off.
You don't even know the results yet. How can you be pissed off?
I don't know. We're just angry.
Fair enough.
So JT, you along with Elizabeth Pruitt and Jamie Lang recently, I guess of today, have published a study in Advanced Biomechanics called The Differences in Core Rotation and Maximum Forward Reach Between Whitewater Kayakers Using Feathered and Unfeathered Paddle Blades. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you go to school, and just kind of give us the background on all this?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, first and foremost, it's not like the study isn't like a peer-reviewed, published research study. It's not like out there for the world to see or anything like that. I go to school at the University of Puget Sound. It's a small liberal arts university in Tacoma, Washington. So we've got a really great Whitewater Kayak Club, really awesome program. It's been awesome to be involved with them since being here. I'm an exercise science major, and so that kind of field deals a lot with biomechanics and anatomy and physiology, a lot of those types of things. And this year for my biomechanics class, the professor said that we could design our own research project. So I got a crew together and got them fired up about looking at paddle offset.
Okay, and so
where did the inspiration come from for this line?
What's that?
Oh, I'm just curious where the inspiration came from for this line of inquiry.
Oh, it stems from, being in the kayaking community and listening to everybody argue over, the proper offset, bent versus straight shaft, the, proper length and all this kind of stuff. The opportunity came where I was able to look at some of these variables and how they affect the things that we care about as kayakers, and figured might as well go for it.
Sweet.
Okay, so start off by telling us what you did.
Yeah. So we had 6 subjects, all of whom were involved in the University Puget Sound Kayak Club, come in, and essentially what we did is we had them sit on, it's essentially like a rowing machine, but for kayaking, kayak ergometer. And we filmed them using a GoPro from above so that we could see how much their shoulders were rotating back and forth and how far forward they were reaching with each stroke. And then we went in and we put reflective markers on both shoulders, their knee, and their hand, and went into a video analysis program and digitized each one of those points. So we clicked on every point in every frame of video for each subject, and that spits out a bunch of data. It's pretty much, it spits out exactly where each marker was for every frame. And from that, we can identify the total core rotation, so maximum angle to the left and maximum angle to the right, and the farthest forward reach, which we called, how far past the knee is the hand at the point where the hand is right in front of the knee.
Okay. And
so did you do anything looking at how vertical your forward stroke was?
No, we weren't able to look at that. We would need more of like a 3-dimensional camera setup, I think, to be able to really identify that well. So that was kind of outside the scope of our study.
So essentially, you determined which, and so you just did 45 and 0, correct? Is that right?
Yeah.
And you determined which is best for rotation between those two, which is best for reach between those two, and which is better for comfort between those two.
Yes. Well, we didn't ask about comfort, but core rotation, yes, and forward reach, yes.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions before we find out what the results of
Should
the study were?
Should we guess?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what you guys think was found.
I'm gonna guess that with a lower offset paddle, you're paddling with like a much lower angle on your stroke, so you're probably getting better rotation and less extension.
Okay.
So I'm guessing more extension for 45, more rotation for 0.
Weld?
I'm going to reserve comment.
What? This is the first time in the history of the Hammer Factor you've ever reserved comment. Okay, let's hear it. So what did you find?
Well, after spitting everything through, a number of programs to find out statistical significance and whatnot.
Now give me the numbers here. Give me you've got a plus or minus deviation there that I saw in the study. Lay that out for me.
The very base of our findings is that for both reach and total core rotation, the 0-degree condition improved both of those variables.
Okay, so essentially the 0-degree paddle is better for your reach and for your rotation. Essentially is the better feather offset for paddling.
That's what our study showed. Yeah. I know you guys don't like to hear that.
I mean, I guess my...
All right, can I start? So this is my whole thing. So with a 0-degree paddle, you have to change your control grip. There's no way you can just hold it like this and just go like that and do it without getting all like cattywamped. Okay, so you're changing your control grip. It's sliding with one hand or the other. If you're in like a crazy paddling situation and you need to like bust out like 5 strokes, how are you going to get like the same stroke rate? Opening grip, closing grip. How does that work?
That same argument has confused me for like the 45-degree offset too. And looking at it from like a perspective of what changes when you cock your right wrist back if you're a right-hand control paddler, like those differences to me seem like they wouldn't make that much of a difference for the problem that you're talking about. And so for me, I've paddled a 0-degree since I started kayaking, and as far as improving comfort, yeah.
Oh man.
Here we go. You just tilted your cards, man. Listen,
Should I have saved that for?
This whole thing started was because in teaching kayaking, you need to adjust your grip when you paddle, right? As from one side to the other, and so I just kept seeing people with 0 or lower than 30-degree offset grip, and they would fail to get a control hand. They would just hold the paddle in some sort of halfway position and maintain the same grip on both hands. And as they paddle, I would watch their wrists sort of cocking forward like that, and they were sort of like, it looked like they were digging in the sand as they were paddling with their
so they
knuckles.
use like just their arms to paddle rather than their core.
No, not just their arms, but rather than letting one hand slide and then regrip the paddle correctly to pull on it effectively, their whole knuckle and wrist was curling down as they paddled, right? And that's how they make up for the control hand. And by going to a higher degree offset, it forces you to release one hand cleanly and crisply. And that makes your paddle pull better. And that never mind. And then when I went on to watch people's lower degree offset paddles do like bow draws and vertical bow draw strokes as they pull their paddle around, because they didn't have a good control hand, they looked awful. They just looked awful. And this was really bad with beginner paddlers, but I also noticed paddlers I'd known for years who were good paddlers, experienced, who went to a lower degree offset paddle, and they reverted to the same cockamamie grip where their wrist is rolling forward like that as they paddle. That was the beginning of this whole thing.
And I would take it even a step further from there and say that when you do that, because your top wrist is in this weird cocked position, it encourages you to paddle like really low, as if you're just taking sweeps all the time instead of taking proper forward stroke and like putting your energy into driving the boat in the right direction.
Right. That's what I'm saying with the bow draws, because when they to do those bow draws with a 0 degree offset paddle, it gets really weird because their hands start to do really weird things as they approach the bow draw stroke. Those really vertical strokes.
Well, I would argue based on that I think it sounds, at least to me, and I've done lots of instructing through the club, and I've got ACA, that whole deal and whatnot. But I would argue that weird cockamamie weird wrist offset thing that you're talking about is more about correcting technique and less about using a paddle as a tool to correct it. That's like a 45 or 60 degree offset like you're talking about sounds like it would correct that issue automatically, but I don't think that it's completely necessary to have an offset blade to correct those issues.
But I think it is, because when you bring your top hand up to vertical, like if you're taking a forward stroke on the left and you're a right hand control paddler, and your wrist just turns over naturally, right? And so if the paddle doesn't have an offset, you have to bend your wrist down to have the blade in the right position for the catch.
Or you have to switch control hands.
If you just
switch control hands.
If you naturally take a good forward stroke, your wrist naturally turns over. And so where that feels comfortable depends on the offset of the paddle. So if you have a really low offset paddle, it's going to feel comfortable for doing sweeps and paddling really low all the time. But if you have a higher offset, it's going to feel more comfortable to have a more vertical forward stroke, which is what you want to be effectively putting power on the boat.
Right. And ideally, we would have been able to also look at force production for each condition as well. But that also was outside the scope of what we were doing. But when you're talking about your wrist turning over, your offhand wrist turning over, what direction are you talking about? Your wrist moving is a forward back motion.
It goes like this. If you hold a paddle like a 0 feather paddle, and your top hand, and you're gonna dig a stroke with your left hand. If you lock hands, you don't release one. Yeah. When you go up, your top wrist is gonna go like this. You know what I mean? You're gonna get up over the top of your paddle. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now, if you let that hand slide, it'll be proper. You'll be able to reach out instead of being like this. You know what I'm saying? So, and with the 0 degree, you can fix that, but you got to change your control hand each stroke to do that. Do you know what I'm saying? There's just no way to get that paddle vertical without that top hand going. You know, you can't be pushing like that with a loose grip.
So I want to see this study replicated where we're measuring how vertical your forward stroke is and doing the whole thing like in the pool and having people do sprints and see what, you know, like what somebody's time is on like a 10 to 20 second sprint with the change in offset.
And I want to see the ergonomics of your wrist to forearm angle as you do bow draws and bow draws into forward strokes.
But I do think that if you switch your control hand, if that's the way you learn to do it, that the 0 degree can be just fine. But
I'm not expecting to like change the hearts and minds of hundreds of kayakers that paddle offset blades with this. It's just like, you know, the results are what the results are, and you can criticize the study any which way you want, but if we will. Like, if we're going to have a point of view, if we want more core rotation, if we want more forward reach, which I think most kayakers do, especially if you're looking to increase power output, then starting beginners off with the best possible resources to maximize those variables, I think, is the way to go.
But yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but those are just variables that are in service of, you know, making the boat do what you want in whitewater, right? And
right.
So it's like the test has to be, you know, how effectively are you able to, you know, generate power in the boat, or
I agree.
Just like includes dealing with like yaw basically, right? Like if you're paddling really low angle, you're just going to be sweeping the bow back and forth instead of driving the boat forward, even if the ergonometer says that you're putting a ton of power out.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's definitely, you know, this like specific area of research has never been looked at before. As far as I know, we couldn't find any previous studies done. It's kind of a niche area to be, I guess.
Dude, I love it. I love it. I think this is super interesting, and I see what you're saying. I can kind of see what you're saying, but there is no way to comfortably do it without changing your control hand, which is scary when you're in hard whitewater, like releasing your paddle and doing all that shooky, you know.
I think there's also a lot of, you know, open room for people to look at different ways to adjust that, because I've experienced in my own paddling, like I'm not letting go of the paddle in hard whitewater to, you know, get my wrists in the right angle. I'd like to think that I'm paddling efficiently and, you know, with proper form and technique. And what I've found for myself is not necessarily rotating my wrist back, but allowing my pinky and like ring fingers on my right hand, if I'm taking a left stroke, to slide out a little bit. That way I still get, you know, really good solid grip with my first two fingers and my thumb, and I'm not changing. I mean, I see what you're saying with the changing control hand thing, but just shifting your position, your wrist position out a little bit has helped me a lot.
Did you control for what offset people normally use? Like, did you notice if, like, was it a bunch of people doing the study who typically used a 0 or typically used a 45, and did they do better or worse based on what they were already acclimated to?
Yeah, we had a pretty solid mix actually of people that typically paddle 45 or 30 or 60 and people who paddle 0 degree. I think we had 4 subjects that usually paddle an offset blade and 2 subjects that usually paddle a 0 degree. And across the board, it was the 0 degree was better for everybody.
Huh.
Very interesting. Well, you are not alone in your camp, JT, because I know when I was sitting at the table when I was in DC with you, Priscilla, she was just so hardcore about 0 degree offset. So,
man. JT, you're brave for coming on here. You had to know that this is gonna be the hardest interview we've ever had. Most contentious we've ever had to be with a guest.
No, I appreciate
John
you.
was trying to get Mike Lee on at one point. And I think we softballed him a little more.
So can I publish these findings on the show notes? Is there a way for these to be available to the general public?
Well, yeah, do whatever you want with it. It's there's no like copyright issues or anything like that. They're all yours to do with what you want.
So give us a little paddling background. How long have you been paddling? Tell me about some of your paddling experience. Let's hear a little bit about you.
I've been paddling for about 4.5 years now. I started just right before my senior year of high school. Family friend got me into the sport and taught me how to paddle a little bit. And once I got to school here, joined a kayak club and was able to progress, as far as personal boating skills, teaching skills, just general like knowledge of the sport. And it's been awesome. It's been really great. And I mean, you guys know how it is. You get hooked and you never look back.
I've been trying to quit for years.
It's ruined my life.
Yeah, exactly. So did the person who taught you teach you with a 0 degree offset?
Yeah, that was like the first paddle I bought just happened to be a 0 degree.
I got to get that guy's number. We got to cut this off at the source. So
We're just making our fight against this flag partner here.
Right.
Well, he was of the opinion that it doesn't really matter, right? He was like, well, some people like an offset, some people like a 0 degree. Really, it's just whatever you learn on. As long as you're using the proper technique, like everything's gonna be fine.
Oh God.
So what's the club scene like out there? Is the club scene like is it thriving at that club?
Yeah.
I'm always interested in. I think clubs are such a good thing that don't get enough attention in our sport.
Yeah, our club has somewhere between like 35 and 45 active members. We have a coach, Clay Ross, who's like an official university. I don't know if he's an employee technically or what, but he's there all the time to help people. We have like an instructor course at the beginning of each year where people who we feel are proficient can come and go through this. It's based off of the ACA course, and so we do a lot of the same technical proficiency stuff, learning how to spot mistakes, and then we bring people into the pool. We have pool sessions twice a week, and we usually have 3 like club-centered trips, like actual river trips each semester, 6 a year. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That is cool.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, JT, when you get your next phase of the study done and get your head out of your ass, we'll have you back on.
Yeah, guys, appreciate it.
You should get some of your friends to. Do you ever go like take pictures at Spirit?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Cool.
Yeah, we're working on not tagging it, if that's what you're in.
Well, man, thanks so much for coming on the show, and thanks so much for reaching out and sharing that.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Let me know if you guys have any more questions about it. I'm happy to answer whatever you have, whatever criticisms you want to throw my way.
Let's get the data up on the show notes, because I'm sure we're going to hear from the teeming millions on this one.
Yeah. It's pretty thorough. It's really good. I certainly enjoyed reading it. I mean, I read the whole thing, so that's saying something. Good job, man.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll see that on the Hammer Factor, and thank you so much.
Right on.
Thanks,
Cheers,
dude.
guys.
Yep.
Well, I thought that was really good. I think JT handled himself quite well in that.
He's a tough crowd, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But he's done nothing to help push this rebellion down. That is for certain.
All I know is there is no way to do that without switching your control hand if you don't want to get that top cocked wrist. You know what I mean?
I think there are some study design issues there.
And when I sit in a pool and watch these pool rolling sessions, I watch all these people paddling around. People with low offset paddles are just curling their wrists around. None of them are bothering to take the trouble of doing that switch control hand thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know, Anyway, there you go. We'll have that in the show notes.
We need a counterpoint. We got to get Sylvan on the show, because I'm sure he'd have something to say about this.
No, I think that's a good idea. Okay, so let's see. I
think Sylvan would probably have few words about this. I think he would just laugh and be like 0? No.
That'd be it. That'd be the end of the discussion. He's been U.S. team coach forever, and done.
Oh man. Well,
what is What's Evan use? Evan Garcia uses what? 45, 60?
I think he uses.
Something like that.
I think he uses a 45.
What's the annual use in Jerd?
Aniel's got a 45. I've asked him.
How about Noria? We didn't ask Noria when she came on the show.
I don't remember on that one.
I mean, she's from a slalom background. She has to have a high offset. I can't imagine anything else.
Isaac told me one day that Vavra uses like an 80 or an 85.
Yeah. Yes. My DR pal
Washing
was
off the
90.
taint of that last interview. I was like, oh, that's what I wanted to
My
hear.
down-
Thank you so much,
Down-
Lewis.
It's 80 degrees and 210. It's a 210, 80 degree.
Oh man.
My first battle that I owned was a 80-degree offset Norse that I believe was a 206.
Right. My first paddle was a 90 degree flat Norse. That's why I'm left-hand control, because you can be either control hand with that setup.
Yeah, because at the lake at Valley Mill.
Either flat mohawks or flat Norses.
Yeah.
90 degrees, take your pick.
The choice was 0 or 90. You got mocked relentlessly if you used a 0.
They handed you a scarf and a 90-degree paddle.
And they didn't have, the paddles didn't have power faces, so like half the kids would just pick it up and naturally start paddling left-hand control. And I remember Ben Lewitt at one point realized that this plague of left-hand control paddling was like infiltrating the campers, so he put indexes on all the paddles so all the kids would get their acts together and not turn into left-hand control paddlers like dear.
Me and like 8 of my paddling friends from that era.
Oh, okay. Well,
I feel like we're like thalidomide babies. We're like a cautionary tale from a far gone age.
okay. Moving on. That was really good. That'll be in the show notes. Have to check that out. I'm sure we're going to get some fantastic listener mail from that one.
Okay, for this next segment, I'm going to go ahead and check out.
Yeah.
Fun, guys.
So
I do not.
let me introduce it here. We got an email here from Tim Bragan. Gents, awesome show.
Valley Mill.
Tim Bragan, Valley Mill.
Tim Bragan was a CIT at Valley Mill when I was a camper.
Yeah. Tim Bragan. Oh, yeah. Tim says, "Gents, awesome show. Please keep up the good work. I was just talking to Neil, the same one Lewis recently told to go fuck himself, about how crazy this year has been." Dude, I feel like Bob and Tom here. We just can't stop laughing. We got to get into this. Where was I at? Tim Bragan. Okay. Tim says, I was... okay, Potomac, DC. About how crazy this year has been on the Potomac. DC is about to clinch its wettest year on record. Can someone else read this?
I can't even look at Weld right now. Weld's glasses are fogging up.
Hang on, I'm actually covering up the camera. Okay. DC is about to clinch its wettest year on record, and I don't think the river has ever dropped below 3 feet all year. It's barely been below 4 feet, and Center Chute Wave has been in more than Maryland Chute. Crazy times. The federal government just released its climate report, and it might be interesting to have a climate paddling expert on the show to talk about what this means for the sport. How will rivers and the paddling season around the country change over the next few decades? What sort of new opportunities will open up as a result? What will be the best paddling location in 10, 50, or 100 years? More importantly, will the western snowpack diminish, and can we interpret that some sort of karmic judgment on Weld's recent decision to sell out the East Coast? Is the next century of global climate change actually his fault? Tim. Okay. So there are. It seems to be that that's the case at this point. But what we've done is we have found an MIT professor from the Department of Oceanography. This is one of the most accredited scientists on the planet today. Just so happens I went to high school with Mr. John Thomas Farrar, and we will see if we can get him on the show.
This is like getting a colonoscopy.
I know. I feel like I've read Tim's email, and I appreciate the glass half full look at it, but it's like every time I start thinking about climate change, I'm so despondent that it's like hard for me to even think about whatever the possible upsides might be.
Well, we have Tom. Are you there?
Yes.
All right. Well, we have Tom Farrar on the show. Tom is an associate scientist in the Department of Oceanography at, what do you call this operation? The Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute?
Yes.
Is that correct? And you have a PhD from MIT in oceanography, and you are here to clear some things up about climate science for us. So, let me pull up my notes here. Tom, you're on the show with John Weld and Louis Geltman. So, little known fact, Tom and I went to high school together. Spent a good bit of time together in college. We went to different colleges.
Can we just talk about that instead of what bad shape we're in? Just focus on you and your shenanigans in high school.
Oh, God. I don't think we want to...
We need to just take like a break every 5 minutes for some John Grace related levity to lighten this up.
Did you describe John Grace as a popular guy in high school? Not so much.
That I can answer.
Yeah,
popular.
Really?
Yeah.
Like a jock, or what was his niche in high school?
Well, John has always been a good guy, but he was a wrestler. I don't know if you guys knew this, but
of course.
And I used to cheat off of Tom in calculus class any chance I could. He may not know that, but I tried my best. But anyway, Tom has went on and done some crazy things. And essentially, give us a little background into your career. We'll eventually get into the $30 million grant you just got from NASA. You and your team just got from NASA. But tell me a little bit about, okay, you left Indiana, went to OU, and give me a little background of how you ended up with a doctorate at MIT.
Okay, so I went to the University of Oklahoma and studied physics and philosophy there. And I was going to go to graduate school for physics. But right at the end of my undergraduate, I figured out that there was such a thing as ocean physics. And I thought, oh, man, that's pretty cool. I should apply to that. And so I did. And I also applied to physics programs. But oceanography seemed really interesting. And so I went to this program at MIT. And so I was there in a joint program with Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, studied air-sea interaction, and a lot of our classes in this graduate program, it was a program in atmospheres, oceans, and climate, and so the classes were together with meteorology students and climate students, and so I did a postdoc after I got my PhD at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and joined the faculty there. And I've been on the scientific faculty for about 10 years at Woods Hole, which we call WHOI, for WHOI. WHOI is one of the world's largest oceanographic institutions, and the oceans are a huge factor in the climate system because water can store so much heat compared to air. I think if you took the upper 3 feet of ocean, it holds as much heat as the whole atmosphere, or kind of if you took the heat from the upper meter of ocean and cooled the ocean by 1 degree, you could heat the whole atmosphere by 1 degree. So it's a huge difference in heat capacity. So it's a major factor in the climate system.
Well, we just received an email a little bit ago, and it basically says the question comes up, the federal government just released its climate report, and it might be interesting to have a climate expert on the show to talk about what that means for our sport. How will rivers and the paddling season around the country change over the next few decades? What sort of new opportunities? You brewing some tea there, Tom?
Yeah, actually my son was supposed to take it off when it finished, but
what sort of new opportunities will open up as a result? What will the best paddling locations be in the next 10, 50, or 100 years? First of all, let's just get to the bottom of this. Is climate change real? Is this a made-up conspiracy by the government to maintain power over the people? What are we looking at? As fill us commenters in here.
Thank you, Alex Jones.
Well, yes, it is absolutely real. I mean, the global temperatures are increasing, sea level is rising. We've been measuring it, and it's clearly just going up and up. It's absolutely real, and definitely there is natural variability in the climate system, but us releasing greenhouse gases definitely affects the global temperatures. This leads to global warming, and we know it for sure. So, yes, it's real.
If things continue for the next 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, what are we looking at? What, like, realistically, when you and your friends sit around and talk, like, give me some of the scenarios.
Oh.
Well, so, I mean,
yeah,
we're on a trajectory for continued rising temperatures, and that's definitely going to keep going for a while, even if we take drastic actions to stop it. But, so that could be depressing, and it's like, why even bother? But I mean, I don't know. You could compare it to the analogy of like, you're driving your car at a brick wall, and you can't stop in time. Should you even hit the brakes? It's like, it's better to slow down.
Maybe it's better just to
just floor it.
Cash it in.
Well, so I mean, yes, it's bad. There was this report that just came out a little while ago about the 1.5 degree C scenario, which would take like really, really drastic efforts on our parts, and it would still be really bad. I haven't gone over that report in detail, but we're committed to a certain level of really terrible impacts. Being an oceanographer, one that I know more about is the fact that coral reefs are dissolving and really decaying, and by some estimates, half the coral reefs are already, really dead or damaged beyond repair. And I don't know if you guys have gone snorkeling or scuba diving on coral reefs. It's awesome, but like our kids may not get to do that. And if we even just stopped all emissions now, we'd have, I think that something like 70% of the coral reefs will be dead. But if we don't do anything, they could all be dead. So I mean, it's like, do we want to drive this mass extinction or do something about it? I think we definitely should. Another aspect of climate change that you guys are probably interested in personally is changing in precipitation amounts and patterns. I guess what we can expect to happen is, or the way that it works, the sun shines on the tropics, heats up the equatorial regions and the equatorial oceans, and that hot water evaporates into the atmosphere, and it drives a big global circulation in the atmosphere. And so the water evaporates in the tropics and rains down on us in mid-latitudes and in the tropics. But sort of that's the engine for the whole climate system. It's the sun shining on the tropics, and all this heat gets transported from the tropics where it's put into the poles. And along with that, a big part of that is the moisture transport in the atmosphere. And the big patterns of rain are basically set by geography. I mean, the shape of the continents, the oceans and the continents and where they're at drives monsoon circulations and the global rainfall patterns. So as the atmosphere warms up more, the hot air can hold more water, and so we can have an intensified hydrological cycle. Basically what it means is the places where it rains right now, it's going to rain more, and the places that are really dry are going to stay dry. Basically an intensification of the whole atmospheric heat engine, you could call it. So it's sort of the water turns to vapor in the tropics, and then condenses, releases its heat at higher latitudes, and falls out as rain.
So okay, go ahead.
I know.
Liz.
I was just gonna say, I feel like this might be like too small of a question given the subject matter, but
He was like, how much rain are we going to get in White Salmon?
well, I guess I was like, is it ever gonna rain here again? Is really what I'm getting at. But in the Northwest, it seems like the meteorologists I pay attention to always say that basically the only tool that they have for long-term weather prediction that has any real legitimacy is El Nino, La Nina. And based on that heating, is it just going to be El Nino all the time from here out, or is that kind of a separate deal? Or
it's kind of a separate deal. I mean, so El Nino has to do with sort of temperature contrast between different places in the ocean, and so you could kind of warm up the whole system, and you'll still have El Ninos. So we won't kick into a permanent El Nino kind of state.
Got it.
Thank
God. We're going to be okay after all.
Yeah, I would say, we wouldn't expect kind of rainfall changes on small scales. I think it's kind of an amplification of the patterns that we already have is kind of the what most scientists expect under global warming.
This may seem like maybe a question that's out of your expertise, but why can't we build something to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's out of my expertise, but I sort of interact with a lot of different scientists and kind of come across ideas like this. I mean, I don't know. There are different approaches. You could try to remove greenhouse gases. You could try to do things like make artificial clouds to reflect sunlight. I don't know. I think it's totally out of my expertise. And at this point, you guys know probably as much as me or your listeners. But, there are a set of steps that we could take of sort of increasing cost and complexity. It seems like the first thing we could do is sort of, with policy decisions, scale back on how much we're putting into the atmosphere. The United States is the second biggest emitter, so we could do something there.
Is coal the big problem here, or one of the bigger problems, or is it just any fossil fuel? Period.
I mean, I don't think that it's particular to coal in terms of the physics. The greenhouse gas emissions, we need to limit the CO2 emissions. And I don't know the breakdown of like what coal contributes versus other forms of other things that cause CO2 emissions.
Right.
But at MIT, there's no like machine that's going to come out and just like pull some greenhouse gases out and dump them down in a landfill somewhere or something.
Well,
you can't talk about it. Just wink or just like tug your ear, and we'll know what you mean.
I don't know, but I mean, I think it's possible. But my understanding is those things are basically energy intensive and sort of costly. You know, forests are a good way. The oceans take up tons of CO2. In fact, it's been really helping us out a lot in that respect. The oceans can really soak up and consume a lot of CO2. There's a ton of plant matter in the oceans, and also they absorb a lot. You know, as we put more CO2 into the atmosphere, some of it just sort of diffuses into the ocean, and that buffers a lot of the climate change that we would see. Also, that works that way for heat too. So the oceans have been heating up, and they have this huge heat capacity compared to the atmosphere. So we haven't felt the full effect of the net heating that our planet's experiencing.
What about? Go ahead, Lewis.
I was just going to ask just how it feels to be working in this line of work right now. Like, do you wake up in the morning and you're just like
weeping?
Like, turn on the news. Like I work on like public lands policy, and that's pretty much how my day starts, is like looking at the news and then putting my head in my hands and just like gnashing my teeth in despair and then trying to pull it together to do something positive.
Thanks for that question. I've been my thinking on this has been evolving over the last years. A few years ago, I would have said, well, you know, I just keep my head down. You know, I'm like kind of policy agnostic. I just want to do my science. You know, I mean, like I'm just trying to figure out how things work, and that's fun for me. But now I'm becoming not policy agnostic. The thing that I'm realizing is that I used to think, oh, well, we just need to convince people, all these people who don't believe climate change is real, we just need to explain it to them. But now I think that's not going to work. All the people who now think that climate change is not real, like will not be persuaded by rational arguments. So, I mean, no more, what other facts can we present to them? So if they're not going to be convinced, I think what we should do is just focus on the people who believe it. And, you know, we need to take action. So those of us who believe in climate change need to make our voices heard. And, you know, if it means yelling and shouting, you know, we need to stand up and try to get political action, because driving a Prius is not going to solve the problem.
No.
You know, it's a good thing to do, but we need big
which brings me to
action.
the next question. I spend a lot of time in Southeast Asia, so I feel like I've seen the apocalypse coming. I mean, it feels helpless, right? I mean, I just know the density of population there, and you know, for whatever we do here, we're going to be dwarfed by whatever's happening there. Never mind what's happening in India or other densely populated places that have almost no environmental controls whatsoever in place.
Yeah, it's really hard. Well, I mean, population growth is like, yes, a big, that's going to be hard to sort of navigate. And another aspect of this is that developing countries, it doesn't work that well for the developed countries that have already burned all the carbon to say, like, hey there, you need to slow down, you know, you're messing things up for us. My girlfriend is a tropical forest ecologist, and one of the things she studies is use of charcoal in Africa. So there's a lot of deforestation because people cut down trees the cities are growing, and you know, in order to fuel stoves and things in cities in Africa, they really need charcoal because even wood isn't that great for it because wood is heavy. So charcoal is light, but it's inefficient. And so they're just, cutting down forests to kind of power cities in the developing world. There's no easy solution. You could get them hooked on gasoline or natural gas, but it's barely an improvement. Maybe it's even worse for lots of reasons, on balance.
So what are we looking at, Tom? Give us 20 years from now, 50 years from now, if things stay exactly like they are. Give us some some sea level rise. Let's just kind of hear some basic predictions. I know this isn't exactly your field, but
I don't know you guys all know as well as me what's going to happen if we do nothing. But it's going to be really bad. The part that's closer to my research, so I also spent time in India studying the monsoons, and there's billions of people living in monsoon affected regions, and these places are where there's a lot of poverty. They're a couple meters above sea level, and it's going to rain a lot, and sea level is going to rise, and there will be huge humanitarian disasters in the places where that are most sensitive to climate change. I mean,
and also the people suffering are going to be the people who've done the absolute least to contribute to the situation we find ourselves in.
That's right. And so, there's a moral imperative to do something, but also just a self-interest imperative. I'm sure, I can't say this is only my gut instinct, but I think our quality of life will go down with everyone else's. We should really take action now to sort of do something about it, because it's our generation. Our children and our children's children can blame us for the extinction of coral reefs and the loss of biodiversity on the planet, ecosystems that are falling out of balance because of relatively small shifts or like changes of a degree or 2 degrees. The effect this has on forests and forest ecosystems, just slight shifts in the onset of spring and the onset of winter can really throw everything out of balance.
It's gonna fuck the paddling.
Totally.
Well,
I went to this conference with the backcountry skiers advocacy group, and they had some research they've done down in the Sierras that just in the last 10 years, the snow line in the Sierras has gone up 1,500 feet. In 10 years. 1,500 feet, man.
Oh, that's brutal.
Well, and so forest fires, it just has all kinds of implications, right? The rivers are out of whack. There's not the water storage. The forest, the ground is dry because the rivers are running all year long. There's not the snow melt in the dry season.
So, what gives you optimism, if anything?
What gives me optimism is that.
The brick wall is coming. It'll soon be over.
A couple of things. So
foot is on the gas pedal.
One thing is that, for example, I've served on the graduate admissions committee for the same graduate program that I went to, where we have people applying to grad school to MIT to study climate. And it used to be, when I went to grad school, it was like, I like physics, I like nature and oceans. And so I can study the physics of the oceans. That sounds interesting. Now we have really smart people applying saying, I want to help save the planet. I think we have a problem, and, the oceans are an important part of the climate system. So I want to do that. And that that's encouraging. But I think there's it's one thing for the 20-year-old kids to be doing this, but I think really I can feel momentum building among scientists where we used to be just keeping our head down doing our science, and now people are, I'm not the only one saying, oh man, we really have to do something, like everybody has to. And so better late than never. I think that where attitudes are changing, and in a generation there, sadly, I think in a generation there won't be anybody that doesn't believe in climate change. And it's partly because it's going to be undeniable when things as it progresses. But
we have people who think the Earth is flat, so I wouldn't give people too much credit on that accord.
Okay, maybe some people.
I mean, more people than I'd ever thought possible.
Oh man,
Tom, going back to rivers here for just a little bit. When I was talking to you earlier today, you were talking about a grant that you just got to work on a project with NASA in relation to using satellites to study rivers, river flows, and whatnot. Before we let you go, can you give us a brief summary of what that is?
Yes. So I think it's pretty exciting for people who love rivers. So I'm involved with the NASA satellite project for a satellite that's being built right now. It's called SWOT, Surface Water Ocean Topography. And I'm involved with it from the oceanography angle, but it's the first NASA satellite that's really devoted to studying rivers. And what it will do, it's called an interferometric radar, and it will measure heights of water with kind of accuracy of centimeters. And it's designed to measure all the bodies of water in the world that are 100 meters in width. But it has resolution down to 10 meters. And so it will pick up lots of rivers and measure their levels. And the satellite will get complete coverage of the Earth every 21 days. But at many locations, you'll get maybe 4 measurements every 21 days.
Gauges from space.
Exactly.
Space gauges.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I mean,
that's really cool.
We'll understand a lot more about river flow in 10 years. In oceanography and meteorology, we've been making satellite measurements for 40 years, really. And we've learned so much from this because it's just a global view. It's kind of, you get years and years of measurements all year round.
So what's something unexpected that you would learn for something like this?
Well, I can't guess what unexpected thing we would learn.
But
I can give an example.
No, like from the past 40 years.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of information. Like, I'm trying to figure what you use all this information for, right? I'm sure. I mean, there's a lot of it there, but how does this translate? Yeah.
Well, so for example, in the ocean, one of the things that we've learned from the satellite era is that the ocean is full of eddies, with scales of like 50 kilometers or something. It's like a sea of eddies.
Are these eddies always in the same place, or are they moving around? Is it like chaos theory?
Well, it's a turbulent ocean. I mean, there are some that are in the same place because of things like land effects, and but it's really like a turbulent sea with all these big, large-scale eddies. Can you guys hang on for a second? Just a minute. Sorry. Hey, John and Oscar.
That's like exactly what my kids would be doing. Like almost identical to what my kids do. It's like Napoleon Dynamite throwing the little doll out of the school bus on a string.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. and we can't.
Hey there.
Here's my daughter Evie.
Hi.
And
Ivy.
she needs to not know what was just happening with the others. Well, so back to the ocean eddies. I mean, this was an important discovery, and it's unfolded slowly. You get the first satellite data and kind of try to make sense of it in the old theoretical framework that we had for understanding the ocean circulation, and it didn't make sense. So we try to interpret it. Are these some kind of large-scale waves that we're seeing? No, they're eddies. And as we got more and better measurements, it was clear, the ocean is just full of these eddies, and they turn out to be really important for explaining the way things are transported around in the ocean, like debris or nutrients for biology.
Does that explain why all this plastic is gathering in one spot in the Pacific?
No, but what's happening there is really, it's the large-scale circulation of the ocean. So there's this, I was talking about this engine of the climate system. So you have heating at the equator and cooling at the poles. And the way the ocean and atmosphere play together in that a lot of it's influenced by the rotation of the Earth. And so when the one thing that's driven when that air rises near the equator is these strong east and west flows in the atmosphere, like on Jupiter, all the sort of east-west stripes that you see on Jupiter. I mean, the same thing is happening on the Earth. We have different scales of east-west bands of winds, but so in the tropics, the winds blow to the west, and in the mid latitudes, like at the latitude of Seattle, the winds blow to the east, in the jet stream, and then those winds blow on the ocean, and it drives because of the rotation of the Earth in the northern hemisphere. The ocean currents are deflected to the right of the wind, and anyway, that it leads to the currents converging around Hawaii, kind of, and so all the surface currents are going into the same place, and it just gathers the plastic patch there, and that's what sets up the kind of large-scale ocean gyres.
Can we go clean that up? Can we just go scoop all that stuff up and put it somewhere?
Yeah, you could, and so I mean, I think probably you could do that, and there's some interesting new research about this, and it's related to this.
Is this more bad news?
Well, no. So one of the things that I study, like in detail professionally, is ocean eddies, and so there are these 50-kilometer eddies that we talked about, but then there are eddies that are like 500 meters in size, and these are they're much smaller, and the eddies at 50 kilometers are basically just moving horizontally, but as you get to smaller and smaller eddies, they have strong vertical motion, which maybe you kayakers can imagine, like that you get into a really strong, tight eddy, and it's also like sucking stuff down. And
we know all about that one.
Yeah. So I mean, in fact, there's something like this happening on kind of larger scales, like 500 meters. And what's interesting is if you put out like a bunch of GPS tracked drifters that stay on the surface and leave them there for a while, you get more intense eddies that are converging just because of like details of the physics than the ones. You can have eddies that rotate one way and have convergence in the center, and eddies that rotate the other way, and they have divergence in the center, so things are moving apart. The converging eddies are much stronger, And so you get these intense regions where things come together. And so there was an experiment in the Gulf of Mexico funded by money from BP as their sort of penance for the Deepwater Horizon spill. And there was a research program where they released thousands of these drifters. And maybe they released, I don't know, hundreds of them in one experiment. And they all they started out spread over like a city the size of Seattle or something. And they ended up all in the area of a football field. Just like got sucked into this little eddy. And so maybe we could use this kind of eddy convergence to go and sweep up like massive amounts of the plastic when they converge into a spot.
Are the depths of the ocean as mysterious as that people make them out to be?
Good question. I mean, it is true that we have very little measurements. I mean, sort of before, things are changing a lot over the last 20 years because we started making kind of autonomous or robotic sensors or, things that we just throw out and they transmit their data home by satellite. And that's made a big difference. We're learning a lot in the last 20 years, but 20 or 30 years ago, there were, regions bigger than, I don't know, Texas or something where nobody had ever made a measurement. And so in that sense, there's like, we've been very measurement poor, but now in the satellite era and with sort of autonomous or robotic sensors, we're learning, we have much more measurements. I wouldn't say more measurements than we know what to do with, but we've kind of tipped over to where we have a lot more information than we used to. And we're starting to be able to see things in detail. But it's true, there are many species. I'm sure we only know a fraction of the species that live in the ocean. There's a lot to learn. I don't know. People say it's like we've done more to explore the surface of Mars or the surface of the moon than the oceans. I think it's true in a way.
All right. Well, we're wrapping up here, Tom. Do you want to stay on for our final segment of the show where we do a rant or a rave about something that we're stoked about or something we want to rant about?
Sure.
All right.
So confidence on your face on this one.
So anyway, this is everybody's favorite segment of the show here. This is Rants and Raves, and I'll lead us off here. I'm going to rave about my 1986 Toyota four-wheel drive truck that I went driving around. We just got 20 inches of snow here in Asheville, and I went driving around to see how the roads were. And I pulled out not one, not two, but 3 SUVs out of the ditch who were stuck in the snow in my little Toyota truck.
That's a great segue from the climate conversation, Grace. Thank you for that.
He's like, I was burning tires in my yard the other day. How warm they were.
Who's next?
I have a weird one. I want to rant about little bags of poop I've been seeing on the trail.
Oh, see?
I'm not kidding.
Dude.
I've never really seen this before. I was at my parents' house this weekend and back in D.C., and sure enough, there are little bags of poop everywhere.
And they leave them. It's not... Okay, finally, someone is agreeing with me. Have you ever seen this, Tom?
Yes.
Okay.
I've seen it.
Yep.
I see them on the street, too. When I'm riding my bike to work.
I mean, this is out in the woods, it's like a green space where it was like a trail, like a running trail, but they're everywhere. I just saw a dozen in the course of an hour.
Thank you. That makes me feel so validated. Thank you very much.
There we go.
That's a good one. Lewis, John?
I've been thinking about this since like 10 minutes before we started recording, and I still have nothing. But I guess I'll rave about surviving this horrible drought by paddling my longboat down the middle. really keeps things lively, keeps me motivated a little bit. It's been awesome having Andrew out here to chase as he recedes into the far distance in front of me. So hanging in there, feeling ready if it ever rains again.
All right, Mr. Farrar, Dr. Farrar, close us down.
Well, it's been a long time since I talked to my buddy John Grace. I'm happy to talk to you. And I was thinking about, what could I share from John's childhood.
God.
But you know what?
Yes.
I don't want to reveal any of it because it all incriminates me or
Nobody listens to this podcast.
I can't think of anything.
Right, don't worry.
Can we openly say that the first time both of us went to jail, we were together?
Yes, we can. I guess.
What was the charge?
My kids can't listen to the podcast.
Well, wasn't John's dad the police chief?
He was in the SWAT department, leader of the SWAT team.
So he could have got you out, right? Or was that sort of just brushed aside?
Yeah, a different town.
Different town. Didn't work out for us.
Yeah, John didn't want to try that. I can't actually remember how that all got resolved.
I'd love to know.
I'm not going to get into it. I remember this one vividly. So.
Yeah, we'll have to take that one up offline.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ticked through every story I could think of and was like, no, not that one.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the Hammer Factor, Tom. Always Dr. Farrar. Always a pleasure, and can't wait for you to come down to Asheville, man. We got the whole posse down here.
All right, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
I think.
All right.
It's gonna be all right.
That was Hammer Factor 60. Thanks for listening.